If stoner were a recipe, it would include one dose of heavy rock inspired by the period 1967 to 1972, one dose of heavy or simple psychedelia from the same era, one dose of groovy rock at rhythm and feel, generous doses of jamming for several minutes. Don't skimp on the bass. A few measures of electric blues here and there, and a little Hawkwind era, space rock to spice it up if needed. Attention, we're not going too fast, at most mid-tempo. Also, if you can, no modern production. If we now want to make it metal, we replace some of these ingredients with early ripening doom metal of the St. Vitus or pentagram type, or even classic early 80s heavy metal, but the latter with caution. The lyrics are left more open, although the general stoner theme is preferred, as are urban fantasy, urban myths, symbolism, and sometimes a bit of occultism. The lyrics about relationships, girls, sex, and the rest, if they exist, are done in a more mature way, compared to what we know from classic rock and metal. The entire aesthetic of the idiom is steeped in the 70s, with many album covers featuring psychedelic themes and patterns. Now, there's also the obvious connection to drug use, mainly cannabis, of course, which is reflected in both the lyrics and the names of bands and albums. I won't dwell too much on the overall concept for the simple reason that we're talking about a part of heavy rock. It's not something only the stoner rockers do, everyone does it. These artists simply chose to incorporate it as part of their overall aesthetic. Now, although with such content and music, we would expect the obvious name to have been applied almost from the genre's first appearance, meaning in the first half of the 90s. All the sources I researched agree that the first official appearance of something close to the term dates back relatively late to 1997 in the Roadrunner compilation Burn One Up, Music for Stoners, which indeed featured some of the biggest names on the scene at the time. Around the period, the term desert rock also appeared, primarily in connection with the stoner rock compilation Welcome to Meteor City, which also featured several significant names. However, this term didn't last long as it was more geared toward the hard rock side, excluding some important stoner rock bands. If you read articles from various magazines, you'll see an incredible variety of artists being referred to as the first stoner bands or the creators of the first stoner album. We start with the most classic candidates like Hendrix, Cream, Led Zeppelin 1, Master of Reality and Volume 4 by Black Sabbath, Hawkwind, and even Blue Oyster Cult. Then we move on to somewhat more specialized things like Iron Butterfly, Blue Cheer, Captain Beyond, Atomic Rooster, to even more specialized stuff like Sir Lord Baltimore, Leaf Hound, Buffalo, Randy Holden, and even completely obscure things like the album Smoking Bats at Campton's by Primeval from Indiana. So, just to join the conversation, I'll start by mentioning the great ZZ Top from the mid-70s, specifically Tres Hombres and Fandango, who for some reason are never mentioned as an influence on the genre, even though in my opinion they were significant in terms of style, image, groove, vocals. And of course with songs like this,
Have mercy. Been waiting for the best all day.
and in music too. If you'd like to delve into more obscure levels, I'd recommend the amazing Japanese guitarist Shinki Chen, both solo and with his band Speed, Glue, and Shinki, as well as the album Stoned Guitar by the New Zealand band Human Instinct. I know you're tired, but I'll still refer you to the two videos I made about proto metal, plus the one about doom metal. But if you don't feel like looking all that up, check out these names too. This 6-year period will mark the first steps of the genre, which will go from being almost non existent at the beginning to something tangible and real at the end. And this is thanks to a series of bands, albums, and personalities that certainly marked this time frame. Let's take a look at them one by one. In 1987, a band called Katzenjammer was formed in Palm Desert, California. 2 years later, they changed their name to Sons of Chaos and released their self-titled EP. 2 years later, they would change their name again, simply to Chaos, and release their first full-length album, Wretch, where the mediocre production only allowed a glimpse of what they were aiming to build. Their members at that time were singer John Garcia, guitarist Josh Homme, bassist Nick Oliveri, and drummer Brant Bjork. In 1992, the band released Blues for the Red Sun, which many consider to be the first complete representation of stoner rock as a genre. From there on, the rest is history. The band always denied any connection to metal, emphasizing their relationship with hardcore punk much more. We will see all its members many times throughout our history. In 1989, in the New Jersey area, Dave Windorf founded the band Monster Magnet, a name he took from a 1960s toy he liked. The Monster Magnet EP was released by German label Glitterhouse Records in 1990, and their first full-length album, Spine of God, in 1991. Although it wasn't a commercial success, the album was praised by critics and is considered one of the cornerstones of the genre, on par with Blues for the Red Sun. The band then went on tour with Soundgarden, which helped them secure a contract with the multinational record label A&M Records. Their last release as an independent band was an EP titled Tab, featuring the 32-minute marathon title track, which, although recorded before Spine of God, it was released later, initially only in Europe. In 1993, they would release Superjudge, which would finally establish them as one of the very big names in the genre, specifically in both stoner rock and stoner metal. Speaking of stoner metal, the awesome English Doomsters Cathedral, after giving us the incredibly slow Forest of Equilibrium, started rocking and going mid-tempo on their 1993 album, The Ethereal Mirror, also helping to establish the genre. With each new album they would release, they would lean more and more towards the stoner side of their sound. In a similar case, the excellent Trouble from Chicago, one of the totem bands of doom metal, incorporated many psychedelic and acid influences into their sound in their 1992 album, Manic Frustration, and their 1995 album, Plastic Greenhead, thus contributing to the foundation of both stoner metal and stoner doom. Another legendary band, Sleep from San Jose, will release their debut album Sleep's Holy Mountain in 1992, giving us a work of equal value to Spine of God and Blues for the Red Sun. I'm not mentioning them together primarily due to the band's lower level of recognition, as they always remained on the fringes of the underground. Of course, those who needed to know them did. All of their future releases were of excellent quality, and through the band, the personalities of Al Cisneros and Matt Pike emerged, who over time became true shamans of the genre with the various bands they created. The band Melvins from Washington State are a very special case. Known at the beginning of the decade for their very unique blend of noise rock, hardcore punk, and doom metal, which would later be named sludge metal, they released the album Stoner Witch in 1994, making a sudden turn towards stoner metal. Their future career will give us an endless series of albums that will spin through many genres, but the influence of that record is undeniable. Let's move on to a series of bands that came from very different backgrounds, but in those years they fully entered the stoner scene, making the genre very well known to a lot of people who had followed them in their previous incarnations. First, the grunge fathers Soundgarden, who were always different from the other big three from Seattle anyway, will release their 1994 album Super Unknown, which, while it became known for Black Hole Sun, was clearly influenced by this new style in its other songs. When Phil Anselmo of Pantera announced the side project Down, a kind of super group from New Orleans with members from Crowbar and Corrosion of Conformity, I don't know how many people expected something like what he played in his regular band. But what they ultimately heard was excellent stoner metal with traces of sludge, steeped in the very unique atmosphere of the swamps of the band's hometown. And since we're talking about Corrosion of Conformity, after the very successful Sabbath-esque groove thrash of Blind, I don't know how many people were expecting something like their 1994 album Deliverance, where the band plays something very close to pure stoner. I think their choice was facilitated by the clear decline of the thrash genre at that time. Meanwhile, the children of Kayas, from the so-called Palm Desert scene in California, wouldn't be long in making their appearance. First and foremost, we have Fu Manchu, who are actually an older band than Kayas. They just had a different name and played hardcore punk. When they released No One Rides for Free, though, as Fu Manchu, they gave us perhaps the archetype of pure, authentic stoner rock, without metal or doom influences. Maryland's Clutch played something close to hardcore punk in their early days too, but they also took the stoner path with their self-titled album in 1995, a path they would never deviate from again in their career. We will meet them again in our story. Finally, I can't help but mention both the awesome Acid King from San Francisco, who gave us the stoner doom gem Zoroaster in 1995, and had the distinction of having a frontwoman instead of a frontman, and the Welsh band Acrimony, whose 1994 album, Hymns to the Stone, greatly helped Cathedral establish stoner metal in the UK. With all this, by the beginning of 1996, the stoner rock and metal scene had gained enough momentum to emerge as a dominant player in the contemporary heavy rock of the time. With classic metal and glam metal having almost disappeared, the fans that didn't like the strange alternative offshoots that would succeed grunge, nor the extreme forms of heavy sound, were thirsting for something new. And they will embrace this new form of heavy rock like a nice, cool glass of water, leading to the scene exploding in the following years. Things are simple, and the numbers describe it much better than I can. When I ask Rate Your Music to return stoner rock and metal albums from 1990 to 1995, I get 69 albums. When I do the same search from 1996 to 2000, I get 279 discs. We're talking about a 400% increase. We're talking about the big bang of the genre. And this was actually after the dissolution of Kayas. If we look back over these years, we had the continuation of releases from most of the bands from the previous chapter: Clutch, Cathedral, Fu Manchu, Sleep, COC. We also had A&M's big push to make Monster Magnet a huge name on a global scale. Ultimately, the band won't make it, although they'll come very close with the gold disc they'll receive in the US for their 1998 Power Trip, a truly top-tier album that will forever solidify the band's immense significance within this sound and all its offshoots. We also saw the emergence of former Kayas guitarist Josh Homme as a key figure in the entire movement. In 1996, he founded his new band, Queens of the Stone Age, and 2 years later, Nick Oliveri joined him on bass. This band will play a key role in the development of our story, although at first it was simply considered as the logical continuation of Kayas. Also, starting in 1997, the guitarist began organizing desert sessions, where he would invite various musicians, from former members of his previous band and Soundgarden, to Twiggy Ramirez, Les Claypool, and even PJ Harvey, to the Rancho de la Luna studios in Joshua Tree in the California desert, and they would record songs they wrote there very quickly and with a strong improvisational spirit. In total, 10 EPs were released from 1997 to 2003, and another 2 in 2019. Their music will be described as a mix of the original grunge sound with the acid rock and the heavy psychedelia of the late 60s. The rest of the Kai-AS members will also prove to have a big impact in the genre. John Garcia would found 2 legendary bands during the period we're examining. The awesome Slow Burn with their stunning 1997 EP, Amusingly Amazing, and the unique Unida with their 1999 album, Coping with the Urban Coyote. Unfortunately, neither of them will continue, but this won't deter him, and he'll return with another band in the 2000s. Brent Bjork will make his excellent solo album Jalamanta in 1999, participate in the Desert Sessions, and found Che, who would only release one album, 2000's Sounds of Liberation. He will also play drums for 7 years in Nick Oliveri's band Mondo Generator, which Josh Homme will also join for a couple of years. Are you confused? It wouldn't surprise me at all. Another giant of the scene, Scott Weinrich, also joins the fray, temporarily leaving the Doom Giants, The Obsessed, founding Spirit Caravan, and giving us another totem of the genre, the 1999 album Jug Full of Sun. Additionally, 2 new, more traditional bands will be formed in Europe and make a name for themselves. The London-based Orange Goblin and the Swedish Spiritual Beggars, featuring the great Michael Amott, guitarist of Arch Enemy. Both of the previous groups will immediately grab the attention of even the most classic heavy metal fans. Sleep's mastermind, Matt Pike, will found High on Fire, giving us perhaps the heaviest and most extreme form of stoner metal ever created. The band Electric Wizard from Dorset, UK, will also have something to say about this, with their blend of stoner and pitch black, steely, monolithic doom metal. They started in the previous period with their 1995 self-titled album, raised the bar with their 1997 album Come My Fanatics, and gave us one of the considered peaks of the entire genre we're examining in this video, with their 2000 album Dope Throne. And since we're talking about heaviness, imagine the surprise of the metal world when the former Swedish death metalers Entombed also entered the scene with their 1997 album To Ride, Shoot Straight, and Speak the Truth. Other very important bands, Karma to Burn from West Virginia, who were unique in being 100% instrumental in the first phase of their career. The excellent Argentinians Los Natas, who with their 1999 album Ciudad de Brahman played on par with American and English bands, something my compatriots Night Stalker also did with their amazing 1996 album Use. Finally, one could say that the rise of Spiritual Beggars paved the way and gave the Swedes the appetite to enter this genre as well, giving us an excellent album that also wouldn't have a sequel, Lowrider's Ode to Io. And to understand why we're talking about that era, here are 20 bands that were active during that time period and one way or another left their mark on the scene. By the year 2000, stoner rock and stoner metal had become established in the minds of the average heavy rock and heavy metal fan. But they still hadn't entered the big leagues. They hadn't crossed over to the mainstream like nu metal had, for example. They needed something else, this big success that Monster Magnet had chased, but ultimately hadn't found the way they planned to. It will finally come from Josh Homme's Queens of the Stone Age, with the album they will release on June 6th, 2000, titled Rated R. It went gold too, just like Power Trip, but it attracted the attention of a lot more people and a lot of people outside the genre. The band's stock rose exponentially, and stoner rock was now a style known by millions of music fans worldwide.
Please allow me to adjust my pants so that I may dance the good time.
Of course, this genre never achieved the sales numbers of nu metal or post-grunge, for example, but it definitely became ingrained in the consciousness of every self-respecting rock fan. I would say that the first half of the period we are examining here is also the golden age of stoner rock. Bands continued to form, while the old ones were now respected by a very large part of the music-loving audience. A lot of new people were getting into the genre for the first time, while many from other rock and metal styles also started taking it seriously. This was helped by both the decline of nu metal and the dislike many people in the scene showed toward the newly introduced metalcore. Stoner was clearly considered more authentic, more traditional, and much closer to the true spirit of rock as we had experienced it over the years. At the top of this recognition were, of course, Queens of the Stone Age once again, with their absolute masterpiece and one of the best albums of the genre as a whole, their 2002 album, Songs for the Deaf. We're talking about one of the most absolutely heavy albums you can hear from a non-metal band, truly unique and unparalleled. From one perspective, of course, this album marked the end of an era for the band. After that, at a steadily increasing rate, Homme would move the band away from the stoner sound and closer to the alternative one. We should also mention that he strongly refused to participate in a Kyuss reunion for years, and that when the other three members of the Blues for the Red Sun lineup began touring under the name Kyuss Lives, he went to court and forbade them from using the name. In 2020, he expressed openness to a possible band reunion. But as of today, 5 years later, nothing has happened. Since we're talking about the legends from Palm Desert, let's mention that in this decade, John Garcia founded a third band, the Very Good Hermano, while Brant Bjork released a series of solo albums, concluding the period with the excellent Gods and Goddesses of 2010. The band's influence was such that even the bassist, who replaced Oliveri from 1993 to 1995, Scott Reeder, also developed into a strong personality of the style. He played with Unita and Goatsnake, has been the permanent bassist for Fireball Ministry since 2014, and was a member of the Palm Desert supergroup 10 East, along with Brant Bjork, Greg Ginn from Black Flag, Mario Lally, key member of the Desert Sessions, and Gary Ars. Let's move on to the other big band of the genre now. Monster Magnet saw the successor to Power Trip, God Says No, 2001, fail commercially, which led to the dissolution of their collaboration with A&M Records and the departure of two members. They went to a new, smaller company and made the very good Monolithic Baby in 2004. But it seemed like the band's legendary days were gone forever. These developments created a significant void at the top of the style, and someone had to cover that up. This someone will be a band we've already seen, Clutch, who, with their awesome 2004 album Blast Tyrant and its sequels, Robot Hive Exodus and From Beale Street to Oblivion, gained a level of popularity and recognition they might never have imagined. And to this day, they continue to tour the world and produce excellent new music. Other names that stood out this decade were the Japanese Boris, who, after exploring a range of extreme noise genres in the 90s, gave us two scorching examples of relentless stoner metal in the 2000s. Heavy Rocks, 2002, and Akuma no Uta, 2003. The formidable Swedish Truck Fighters, with four very important examples of modern stoner rock for the period we are examining. The very interesting and particularly experimental by Sleep's Al Cisneros, and finally Weno's three new bands, Place of Skulls, The Hidden Hand, and the stoner sludge supergroup Shrine Builder with Al Cisneros, again, but also members from Neurosis and Melvins. As for new bands, we had a lot going on here too. Now, slowly, and as the decade we're examining progressed, the genre seemed to fade a little, to recede. And this wasn't just due to the fatigue caused by the countless new names that had emerged from the style, but also to the competition with two other heavy rock genres, both related and with a significant degree of overlap with the core stoner genre. The first is sludge metal. We've already defined it as a cross between hardcore punk, noise rock, and doom metal. It certainly has many common characteristics with stoner, but it's clearly heavier and more extreme. It started in the 90s with various bands like the Fathers of Sludge, Melvins, and then Boris, whom we've already seen, Crowbar, I Hate God, Neurosis, Acid Bath, and Iron Monkey. During that decade, it had gained a level of recognition within the extreme metal scene, but that was it. In the 2000s, it would have its own big breakthrough, driven by the massive success of two names, Mastodon from Atlanta and Isis from Boston, as well as the meteoric rise of Neurosis. Other bands that were very popular at the time were Cult of Luna, Amenra, Rosetta, and The Ocean, while bands like Yob, High on Fire, and Bongripper brought about the logical intersection between the two genres, namely sludge and stoner. Around the turn of the decade, we also saw the success of a less extreme version of the style, with the recognition of two bands from Savannah, Georgia, Kylisa, and Baroness. Both of the previous bands have a clear stoner dimension to their music, a thing we could also say about Mastodon themselves, although for them the sludge and progressive aspects clearly take precedence. The second style is heavy psych. Here, the overlap is even greater. Practically, it's like taking the basic characteristics of stoner and toning them down, while correspondingly turning up the psychedelic aspect, always keeping the heaviness high, of course. Many stoner bands often did it themselves. For example, Earthless, Color Haze, Dead Meadow, Witch, or Woe Fat. However, the end of the decade brought a series of names who did it in a clearly more distinct way, to the point where we had to differentiate them from the mother scene. I'm talking about the Canadian band Blood Ceremony, the American bands Jex Toth, Comets on Fire, and Radio Moscow, the Dutch The Devil's Blood, Italians Wicked Minds, the British band Uncle Acid and the Deadbeats, and the Swedish band Witchcraft. This scene will maintain its momentum, which will make it a very dynamic presence in the next period we will examine. The early 2000s gave stoner an almost unexpected boost through the success of Portland's Red Fang and their album Murder the Mountains, which was greatly aided by a series of very original music videos that went viral at the dawn of the new YouTube era. However, this success won't be sustained and will appear like a firework, a final flash of a style in clear decline. The full emergence of the heavy psych, retro, proto-metal, or whatever you want to call it scene, in the early years of the period we're referring to, with bands like Jess and the Ancient Ones, Year of the Goat, All Them Witches, Person, Fuzz and Ty Segall, Sacrimonte, Horisont, The Heavy Eyes, Big Elf, etc., is arguably what sealed the audience's rather distancing from the pure stoner of the previous years. I will repeat, though, that everything is relative, as many of the previous bands had a clear stoner parameter. And anyway, as we saw from their definition, the two genres are very close. This new group of bands also had an additional occult coordinate, coming not from early 80s heavy metal, but directly from the late 60s, and bands like Coven and Black Widow. There was indeed a difference here, as classic stoner had neglected this parameter. So let's see what else happened in the genre in these 15 years. Clutch continued to release highly successful albums, confirming their leading position. Monster Magnet made a full recovery and continued recording undeterred. They never reached the heights of the 90s again, but that's okay. It's good enough just to have them with us. After the Kyuss Lives case, Nick Oliveri found that Bjork and Garcia were maneuvering to take the rights of the original band name, and he left the project, while the other two renamed the band Vistacino and released an album that was not followed up. Finally, since 2022, Scott Reeder has been part of a stoner supergroup featuring Laura Pleasance of Kylisa and members of Fu Manchu and Greenleaf, called Slower. Some interesting bands from the period are the Berlin-based Cadavar and the Roman Black Rainbows, both immersed in the heavy psych style we mentioned earlier, while Bloody Hammers from North Carolina, beside the interesting fact that they were named after a Roky Erickson track, showed a very interesting chameleon-like quality, starting as stoner rock, transitioning into traditional gothic rock and metal, and ending up as hard rock with elements of horror punk. I think it's indicative of the times, which don't require you to be stuck in one genre and one dimension. Finally, a sign of the times is the very good band from Quebec, named Dope Throne, which proves that the golden age of stoner has now reached a level where it is recognized as part of heavy rock history. Generally, most new stoner bands were heavier than in the past and clearly drew from stoner metal, with some leaning toward doom metal. I will specifically mention the London band Elephant Tree, the Polish trio Dope Lord, Weedpecker, and Belzebong, the French band Mars Red Sky, Americans Black Pyramid, Ukrainians Stoned Jesus, and the Finnish Domovoid. None of the previous artists reached the peaks of earlier times, but I don't think that matters, and even mere fact that all these names came out is an indication of the genre's continuity and health. So, that's the story of stoner, a story that will leave behind hundreds of names and vast reserves of excellent music, but also a clear parameter that modern rock music, whatever it's called and wherever it comes from, can utilize. And that certainly is more than important. The immense recognition of Night Stalker as an integral part of the global stoner scene, as well as the great love my country showed for the genre, made it clear that a Greek stoner scene would develop. Just think that Rate Your Music recognizes 129 albums from my country as belonging to the stoner genre, from its very inception until today. Obviously, bands started popping up like mushrooms, although we had to wait a while until we got another name with a global impact. But the wait was worth it because in the end we actually had 3. Planet of Zeus, founded in 2000, with 6 albums released from 2008 to the present. 1000 Mods from the province of Carinthia, with 5 albums and 4 EPs from 2006 to the present. And finally, Villagers of Ioannina City, from Ioannina, obviously, with 2 albums and a very important single from 2014 to the present. For the latter, it's very characteristic that they sing in both English and Greek, and that they have resonated with a very large part of the domestic audience, as the video you're watching testifies. From there on, there are many bands. I singled out the following: Acid Mammoth, with 5 albums from 2017 to the present; Kirky, with 2 albums from 2021 to the present; Def Radio, 3 albums from 2017 to the present; Puda Volcano, with 4 albums from 2011 to the present; Green Yeti, with 3 albums from 2016 to the present; and Half Gram of Soma, 4 albums from 2013 to the present. Here we have something in common with the Greek scene, which is the fact that one band pulled up all the others. Obviously, this band is Los Natas from Argentina, whom I mentioned earlier. Of course, a big influence was also the excellent scene of heavy psychedelia and proto-metal from the early 70s, which was thoroughly presented in the second video I made about proto-metal and featured bands like Papos Blues, Pax, Pescado Rabioso, Tarkus, Manal, Vox Day, etc., etc. Thus, as early as the late 90s, very strong names began to emerge in the region. The scene has 2 main characteristics. Firstly, many bands sing in Spanish, which, to be honest, suits the overall style. And secondly, the almost complete absence of Brazil, which, on the contrary, is very active in many other heavy rock scenes, most notably the thrash scene. The most prominent bands that emerged during the genre's golden age are
Llega el hijo del diablo, acá vino a nacer.
In recent years, a number of new talents have been added to these very important names, such as the Chilean bands Demonauta, Occultum, and Humanotone, the Argentinian bands the Black Furs and Black Sky Giant, and for the first time, a Brazilian band, Pesta, from the cradle of extreme thrash, Belo Horizonte. Finally, I'd like to mention a great hope of the scene, the formidable Mephistopheles from Buenos Aires, who comfortably play across 3 styles: stoner, doom, and heavy psych, while also having a very distinctive aesthetic that evokes both the 70s and the golden age of the genre.